Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's Global Conversation in Literacy Research with Dr. Patrick Shannon. It's nice to see so many returning GCLR web seminar participants, as well as those of you joining us for the first time. We're glad you are with us. Tonight's presentation, A Closer Reading of the Common Core, Reading Wide Awake, will address the important role of identity in language and literacy. Please feel free to interact with Dr. Shannon's ideas throughout the seminar by typing in the chat area. We are pleased to share with you that Dr. Shannon has a new edited book entitled Closer Readings of the Common Core that considers assumptions, logic, articulation, and likely consequences of Common Core standards in public schools. Its primary goal is to help teachers and administrators and perhaps state policymakers to step back from issues of implementation in order to consider the past, present, and future of Common Core standards and its connections to literacy education in classrooms. Your moderators for this evening are Dr. Peggy Alberts, and Dr. Dennis Odo, professors of language and literacy at Georgia State University in Atlanta, Georgia, USA, and me, Natasha Thornton, a language and literacy doctoral student at Georgia State University. We also have David Brown, Tuba Enge Crowder, and Christy Pace joining us. They are doctoral students at Georgia State University and part of the GCLR research team. Global Conversations in Literacy Research consists of online interactive web seminars with the intent to circulate cutting-edge research in the fields of literacy and language arts. GCLR currently seeks volunteers for a study on the nature of technology-mediated interactions within literacy-focused web seminars. If you are willing to participate in a brief interview, please type your email address into the chat area and a research team member will contact you within a few days to schedule an appointment. You can also go to our website to take our survey. The collected data will provide important information for understanding the nature of web seminars to share scholarship across the world. During tonight's web seminar, if you have any questions or comments, please type them into the chat box. Dr. Odo will monitor that area, and Dr. Shannon will address these as time permits at the end of his presentation. We would love to know from where you are participating in tonight's web seminar. So please use the red wand located on the whiteboard tool to the immediate left of this slide and click your location on the map. If you are having trouble locating the wand, a picture of it is located at the bottom of this slide. Thank you. Dr. Patrick Shannon is a professor at Pennsylvania State University in the USA, where he teaches and serves as the coordinator of the Reading Specialist Certification Program and the Integrated Undergraduate Graduate Program for Special Education, Curriculum, and Instruction. He is known for his work in critical literacy, democracy, and equity and equality among citizens. His research addresses the following questions. What is literacy? Who is considered literate? What is read and written? And how is literacy taught? Dr. Shannon's current research includes the development of a sociocultural multimedia alternative to response to intervention for children. His most recent publication entitled Closer Reading of the Common Core, asking big questions about the English language arts standards includes critical analysis of the Common Core state standards from respected scholars that provide teachers, school leaders, and policymakers the knowledge necessary to ask the important questions about these standards to ensure their instructional decision-making remains meaningful and well-informed. Finally, one last interesting fact about Dr. Shannon is that he plays in a band called the Beaver with his friends from high school. At this time, and on behalf of the GCLR team, it is my privilege and pleasure to present Dr. Patrick Shannon. Please join me in welcoming him with a virtual round of applause.
Hi, can you hear me? Hi, can you hear me? I'm hoping you can hear me. I can't yet.
Yes, we can hear you, Pat. Go ahead.
Good. Sounds good. I'm Pat Shannon. The band played last night, so I'm a little worse for wear. I have technology that I have to work with. I'm not necessarily terrific at that, so I'm a little nervous about that. But I'm not nervous about the points that I'm going to try and make about the Common Core standards and about reading wide awake. As Natasha was very kind to say, the titles of the talk come from two books, Closer Readings of the Common Core, Heinemann out this summer, and Reading Wide Awake, which was published last year by Teachers College Press. I'd like to begin the talk with, and I think I know what I'm doing, I'd like to begin the talk with two statements. I've developed a script because I want to talk for about 45 minutes or so like that, and you can see that I can't keep time, so I've got a script that I'll read along. I'm going to begin with two statements from perhaps the most powerful voices in American education. The first was President Obama. Here it comes, right there, and if you read that, he's talking to the National Governors Association. Perhaps you've heard that before, something like it. Here's Bill Gates talking to the National Conference of State Legislators the year before. So when I first read these statements, I thought they offered some hope that kids are important to us, that we share some standards, that we're confident that we can change, and that education is the ticket to that change. But I'm not new to the process of developing national standards in the United States, or how the state and business, and that's who Obama and Gates represent, have framed schools as lacking standards without government mediation, and teachers as incompetent unless tightly bound through aligned systems. And Obama and Gates have started tossing around money in order for states and school folks to do the right thing. So my immediate enthusiasm was tempered. As you're probably aware, the Common Core standards promote close reading, and my agenda is to read its history, its rationale, and its development closely. Closer reading, according to the rhetoric around the Common Core, suggests that I should know what a text says, what it means, and what it does. On the left hand of the start of that slide is the way in which the Common Core phrased them, and on the right is David Pearson's words. He suggests that the standards align with the RAND model from 2002 and the National Assessment for Educational Progress test. If you look underneath that, that's the anchor standard number 8 that all graduates from high school should be able to do. Would you read that? The Common Core's preferred text form for reading is print with identifiable boundaries. I'm going to expand that a little bit about what text might be. And they want readers to walk all four corners of the boundaries of a text, and I do plan to do that with their work. For me, the fun of reading starts with exploration of what text does. Close reading requires waking up to 3 issues. Institutions are always trying to teach us what we should know, who we are, and what we should value. This is not just the government, but also courts and media and think tanks and businesses and sports and churches. You name an institution and I suggest that they're practicing public pedagogy. Their work always involves texts that are supposed to be read in a particular way, an expected way. And here I want you to think about text broadly. Everything can be a text, from the typology around your home, to toys for children and adults, to radio programs, to the fabulous outfit that I'm wearing tonight. You get the idea. You can read it all. These pedagogies and texts are always political, expressions of relative power of the encoded ideologies. Ideology is a shared set of ideas and values that serve to justify and support the interests of a particular group. Jeff Willems and David Pearson suggest that the Common Core should embrace reading wide awake, and that's what I intend to do, demonstrate reading wide awake with the Common Core as the example. I'll use the opening quotes as representations of the entire Common Core process. I'll push on how those loud voices, Obama and Gates, frame the rationale for a Common Core acting as mouthpieces for an ideology, that shared values hidden within the Common Core. People who limit text to print, like Tim Shanahan, have called reading wide awake out of bounds because it doesn't stick to print text alone. Guess which finger I'm using to push this button. I'm going to work through the Common Core history quickly because I hope you'll see connections right away, or you've already made them for yourself. The Council on Foreign Relations has connected the Common Core with national security in ways reminiscent of the National Defense Act of 1958, that we lead the world in math and science, and then it was foreign language. Linda Darling Hammond sees carefully implemented versions of the Common Core as linchpins in more equitable distributions of school benefits across race and class and ability, along the lines of the original intent of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act from the 1960s. And the GE Foundation connects the Common Core to the development of human capital, like the Smith-Hughes Act in 1917 when the soldiers came home, or the Bill of Rights when they came home in the Second World War, in order to get them ready to be in business. In a slightly different light, the Common Core can be understood as the culmination of 30 years of direct calls made and actions taken to increase academic rigor. I hope the notes on the screen ring bells of association. It's important to note that the federal government withdrew directly from national standards business in 1994 when the House of Representatives condemned the national history standards as anti-American. What they did was privatize the process through the development of Achieve, a non-government agency charged with brokering a consensus to support for raising academic rigor in high schools. Achieve's funding originally came from foundations, Battaglia, Gates, Cisco, GE, JP Morgan, Hewitt, as well as businesses, Boeing, IBM, Lumina, and State Farm. As private, all Achieve's actions were without public oversight. Early in 2004, Achieve identified what they considered what all high school graduates needed to know for careers in college. In 2006, Achieve established an annual review to evaluate how closely state standards approximate what every graduate needed to know. And in 2008, Achieve discovered through their reviews that there was enough similarity among states to begin the process of a Common Core English language arts and for math. That's when Obama entered with Arne Duncan with a plan for states to race to the top for the Common Core standards. The production of the Common Core standards, from reading for college anchors down through kindergarten and now into preschool standards, were produced in 11 months. The process of development was typical of this kind of activity. Authorities selected panels, working groups, and committees to reach consensus on issues that the selected members already essentially agreed with, and then they worked out small details. To do otherwise would be to reproduce the national and field debates about the ideas and actions within the production process. Once they just made the decision, hey, let's make Common Core standards, then all they wanted were tweaks, not turmoil. And then, of course, the adopters, that states, had to be incentivized, that's the word they use, to do the right thing and adopt. Because the branding of the work as Common Core state standards is questionable because of those 4 issues that are on the screen right there, I don't use the term state standards, Common Core state standards. They're just Common Core standards. If it were a genuine consensus among states, then we wouldn't need the bribes and the arm twists in order to get people to do the right thing. All this history gives some context for Gates' statement about how Common Core advocates achieve the alignment of the parts of the Common Core across most states, 45. The feds gave $350 million of stimulus money for the Partnership for Assessment of Readiness for College and Careers and the Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortium to write new tests. Rules for publishers were written to supply tools for the teaching. Gates donates money to states donated money to states to enter the race to the top, and he still gives money for them to adjust their state standards. And he also gives money to organizations which agree to promote the Common Core to the profession and the public. And I'm talking about Education Week, the National Library Association, the National PTA Association, the National Association of Supervision and Curriculum Development. They're all received money to promote the Common Core. In effect, in 2014, the United States will have national standards and tests. But why? In their statements, President Obama and Bill Gates provide 2 connected rationales for the Common Core standards. First and foremost, they argue the United States is falling behind other countries in the new global innovation economy, and it's because our education system is failing. Second, they locate the remedy for that situation in the realignment of educational systems according to a single set of world-class standards that will improve individuals and national performance, productivity, and competitiveness. Even governors critical of the federal Common Core standards seem to accept these 2 rationales as evidence-based and accurate. I'm talking about Mark Dayton in Minnesota, Nikki Haley in South Carolina, and Rick Perry in Texas. Yet we can read the same evidence that they look at closely and ask a series of questions about whether it offers a sufficient basis for the great expense of national standards production and school alignment. Here come the questions. Is America falling behind economically? These are decidedly hard economic times for many in the United States. However, few can point with justification towards schools as cause for these hardships or the immediate remedy for our sluggish economy. And things aren't much better elsewhere. In international comparison, America enjoys, perhaps not equally, the world's largest economy, still twice as large as the nearest competitor, China. Goldman and Katz give schools partial credit for the expansion of the U.S. economy during the first half of the 20th century, but they offer no credit to schools for the continuation of Americans' economic growth during the second half of the 20th century or into the 21st. We must face facts, however. Eventually, China will catch the United States economically, not because the United States is declining, but because China's workforce is 4 times larger. Currently, Chinese workers need only be 1/4 as productive as their American counterparts in order to maintain its relative status. Any increase in Chinese productivity and their economy gains ground regardless of American productivity. Since the 1950s, American workers' productivity has increased steadily, accelerating rapidly after 1995. Former Secretary of Labor Robert Reich attributes the increase to the rise of technology in the workplace, often displacing workers, and explains that many other countries have relatively the same access to such technology as the United States. Eventually, he reports that America's 20th century economic advantage will vanish in a competitive world. Is education responsible for workers' productivity? Economist Joon Chang doesn't think so. Quote, What really matters in the determination of national prosperity is not the educational level of individuals, but the nation's ability to organize individuals into enterprises with high productivity, end quote. The ability to organize productively relies on government's capacity to provide a range of institutions that encourage investment and risk-taking. A trade regime that protects infant industries, a financial system that provides patent capitalization, good bankruptcy laws to protect capitalists, and good social safety net to support workers during transitions and in times of trouble. And of course, public subsidies and regulations for research, development, and training. These are the changes that led to the economic successes in the Asian countries that President Obama mentioned. During the last half-century, each has realigned its government in order to provide these institutions and policies. Their educational systems are a consequence, not a cause of this realignment and rise. Truth be told, the American government facilitated many of these international changes and provided, and still provides, incentives for American business to participate in the expansion at the expense of American labor. Certainly, global economic policy is beyond the reach of American education, although many from all political stripes argue that the design of American schools was and is organized to teach workers appropriate dispositions. Most schools' subjects were and are never intended to raise workers' productivity directly. I'm thinking of the arts and literature and history. Does that limit their value? Some think so. For example, both Obama and Gates call for more attention to math and science and technology, and the Common Core standards increase informational text loads for students at every grade level in order to ready workers for careers in college. But even those work-related academic subjects do not have strong associations with economic development. And we can see that in the very test scores to which Obama and Gates point. Consider the international rankings among countries according to reading and math scores. The 2009 PISA for reading, American students were listed 17th among nations, behind the Asian nations that Obama mentioned, but also behind Poland, Iceland, and Estonia. In math, American students were slotted at 31st, behind Slovenia, the United Kingdom, and Portugal. It's difficult to imagine an economic rubric that would rank all these economies higher than ours. Chang reports that the amount and quality of schooling is not even highly correlated with worker productivity, let alone causally linked. Does that mean that we should de-emphasize traditional school subjects? Not if we believe that the subjects will enrich students' lives and help them to become good citizens. Does the global innovation economy require workers to acquire new skills? Remember, the knowledge economy is not new. Command over knowledge has always provided economic advantages through technology. Think China in the first century with paper and movable type and gunpowder and the compass. Britain from 1750 to World War I, or the United States in the first half of the 20th century. These advantaged positions, however, do not mean that every worker in those circumstances commanded the valued knowledge or enjoyed its benefits equally. New York Times columnist Thomas Friedman makes this point indirectly, but clearly. He calls for the U.S. Congress to abandon its effort to bring the internet access to rural America, diverting those resources in order to provide, quote, ultra-high-speed bandwidth to the top 5% of university towns which invent the future, end quote. The smart cities around universities, he tells us, must have educated populace with abundant human intellectual capital who will engage in high-performance knowledge exchanges using intelligent objects to mine data, analyze it, and discover new goods and services. The remaining 95% of us, he continues, must learn to accommodate the flows of resources into smart cities and to support the distribution of innovations out from their borders. Friedman claims this is America's only hope to preserve its middle class. In this way, the combination of employing technology to improve productivity and redeployment of resources to support the innovative 5% does not translate into new skills or the need for more education among all the 95% who are to serve this economy. Of course, that's only true if we continue to buy the rationale that the primary purpose for schooling is to make all students career and college ready. The U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics represents this reality in its estimate of the 30 fastest growing jobs between 2010 and 2020. 21 of those 30 jobs requires a high school diploma, perhaps. I'm talking about a variety of healthcare aides, construction laborers of many types, and bicycle repair, my favorite job. 6 require BAs, health educator, marriage therapist, and like event planner. And only 3 require professional training, veterinarian, biomedical engineer, physical therapist. All of these occupations, and many of the ones that are not growing as fast, could require new dispositions, perhaps, in order to manage more independence from direct supervision. But they don't seem to require new academic knowledge and skills as claimed in the rationales for the Common Core standards. And if it's new independent dispositions that we need, then will we get those from an aligned force system of education? Are American schools failing? During the Reagan administration, A Nation at Risk report claimed students were not reaching the same levels of literacy as their parents and grandparents, and therefore school reform was urgently needed. In a government-sponsored report, the Sandia Laboratory proved that claim to be false. Students' test scores in the 80s were higher than during the 1960s and the 1940s. Although President George H.W. Bush never released the report, the findings were available and circulated in The Manufactured Crisis by Berliner and Biddle. And at least some scores are still rising. The 9-year-old NAEP scores, National Assessment of Educational Progress scores, are 12% higher than they were now than they were in 1978. But for 17-year-olds, the scores remained about the same. That's not overwhelming success, but it's certainly not failure. Comparisons of international reading scores demonstrates that there are 2 American public school systems, one for the middle class and one for the poor. American schools with few students eligible for free and reduced lunch, the way that researchers talk about poverty. The scores are, those ones with little poverty score at or above the top international scores. Schools with high concentrations of students eligible for free and reduced lunch, or poor schools, place among the lowest scores among nations. This achievement gap between rich and poor school systems has increased 40% since 1970, as income segregation within metropolitan areas has doubled, and the incomes of 80% of American families have stagnated. Although these findings make it clear that American public schools do not serve all students well, these researchers do not conclude that public schools are failures. Rather, they identify out-of-school factors as inadequate social policies, as well as in-school factors that explain the gap between the 2 systems. They call for coordinated strategies reminiscent of the war on poverty to address poverty, segregation, and school achievement simultaneously. Are Common Core standards a key to closing the differences among these scores? In the Brown Center report for American Education, Tom Loveless reminds us that countries scoring above and below the United States on international tests employ national standards, and therefore common standards cannot be the sole cause of high achievement. Although Gates could be correct that Common Core standards aligned with curriculum and tests explain high scores. However, Finland's scores and system confound that conclusion. Finnish schools produce high scores but de-emphasize standardized testing. Like all factors, standards appear to be woven into a network that explains, or doesn't explain, a country's academic performance. Pulling one strand, like the Common Core standards, as the cause for success or failure is arbitrary at best and misleading at worst. Why not choose a social safety net for families as a factor to emphasize? After all, 80% of students in Singapore qualify for and live in public housing, and their scores are higher than ours. Why not fund adequate housing as the key to raising scores? The income achievement gap persists in every state in the Union. This remains true despite No Child Left Behind requirement that each state develop and enact rigorous academic standards. Early in the No Child Left Behind process, the Bush administration checked and proclaimed that each state had rigorous standards. If uniformity of standards, a common core, were a solution, then the gap within states would have narrowed markedly over the last decade. According to Reardon, the racial achievement gaps have narrowed slightly. However, the income gap has widened during that period. Neither standards nor commonality seems to be key. Are standards likely to raise achievement overall? The second rationale for the Common Core standards assumes that the quality of standards and the rigor with which they are applied will raise every student's achievement and reduce the gap that exists among social groups. Building on Whitehurst's earlier study, the impact of state standards on the National Assessment of Education progress scores, however, Loveless doubts the likely impact of Common Core of students' achievement beyond what state standards have already achieved. He shows that the quality of state standards as judged by experts does not predict student achievement. He shows that the rigor of setting high cutoff scores to demonstrate proficiency does not predict students' achievement, and that a combination of the two does not predict the narrowing of the income gap. Loveless explains, the quote that's on the slide, within state variation is 4 or 5 times larger than the variation between states, unquote. He adopts a popular Common Core standards metaphor to explain the statistical finding. While advocates claim that Common Core will overcome the achievement differences between Massachusetts and Mississippi students, Loveless shows that every state already has mini Massachusetts and mini Mississippi's contrast within its borders. Are the Common Core rationales evidence-based? No, not at least as President Obama and Bill Gates have articulated, although the Common Core language arts standards themselves could be evidence-based. The United States is not behind economically, although citizens do not share its success equally. The new global innovation economy does not demand new skills for all or even most workers. American schools are not failing generally, although American policies and institutions do not and have not historically served all social groups well. Standards are not easily discernible as a key to difference in academic outcomes among nations or states, and the quality of standards and the rigor of alignment are not likely to have the desired effect. In summary, we lack a compelling evidentiary basis for the idea of Common Core or the subsequent national alignment of curriculum and assessment. Why then did the National Governors Association and the Council of Chief Education Officers and 4 administrations spend so much time, energy, and money to create the Common Core standards? And why do so many philanthropic foundations, think tanks, and business groups push them and fund them? Larry Cuban suggests that the answer to such questions can be found in the pragmatics of policymaking. Policymakers focus on solving problems, but they don't have ready-made solutions to apply, or they wouldn't be problems. To begin, policymakers and their associates, and this can be a large group, from citizens to support staff to lobbyists of all stripes, struggle to name the problem and to propose the possible solutions. Before policymakers try any, they compare and contrast these proposed alternatives in terms of probable costs and benefits until they decide on which one or ones to test in the real world. As Cuban states, quote, a policy is both a hypothesis and an argument that a particular action should be taken to solve a problem. That action, however, has to be politically acceptable and economically feasible, end quote. Although policy making might appear to be a purely rational process, policymakers must work within established political priorities. Stripped of their claims of a declining economy, failing schools, and an apparent solution, all that's left in President Obama and Bill Gates' statements is the development of the national market for technological tools in order to reorganize
teaching and learning. And the quote, this is the quote, part of the quote from the Gates statement earlier in the slide. When the tests are aligned with common standards, the curriculum will line up as well, and it will unleash a powerful market of people providing services for better teaching. For the first time, there will be a large uniform base of customers looking at using products that can help every kid learn and every teacher get better, end quote. This is a remarkably candid statement that lets political ideologies shine through the representation of Common Core as a rational solution and their frame of Common Core as the means to develop American human capital in order to compete in global innovation economy. An ideology is a shared set of ideas and beliefs that serve to justify and support the interests of a particular group. Gates tells us that national alignment will serve as a catalyst for, quote, a powerful market of people providing services for better teaching that will invent the future of education. Within this change, schools and teachers become, quote, customers looking at using products, end quote, once these innovators have completed their designs. It doesn't take a linguist to recognize the relative power of the agents of Gates' hypothesis and argument for the Common Core. In fact, Gates offers a smaller version of Friedman's proposal. Public resources currently devoted to public education should be, and are being, redirected to private businesses ready to discover new technologies for schools, teachers, and then students to consume. In this way, Gates engaged in the ideological practice of naming positions for participants through his articulation of the apparently normal everyday activities, production and consumption of commodities. And with these positions come the expected dispositions, encoded in the standards and modeled in the official demonstrations of Common Core standards practices. Gates assigns the government officials positions as well. Previously, and his phrase for this is for the first time, government regulation of public education as a state's right prevented these innovators from producing the needed technologies because the markets were too small and too varied. Now, however, with federal backing and states' quote-unquote choice, Common Core standards erases state lines and empowers businesses to invest and take risks while anticipating sizable profits from economies of scale. This position fits well with Chang's explanation of how government's action can actually increase national prosperity by organizing actors into productive enterprises. But with Gates' phrase and his recommended actions, 150 years of normal government practices surrounding public education becomes the barrier that stands or stood in the way of powerful markets and profits. That's the political ideology of neoliberalism seeping through. Neoliberals pursue traditional liberal goals: individual liberty, equality before the law, and protection of property, using market relations rather than government policies, uniting business, philanthropy, think tanks, government officials, educational experts, taxpayers, school officials, teachers, and students through market relations and market solutions. All the key concepts of neoliberalism are included: the rule of the market, deregulation, privatization, reduction of public expenditure, and individualism. According to this ideology, by opening public education to market forces, competition among private companies will replace current teaching practices with the most efficient and effective technologies available in an ever-ending cycle of creative destruction. This is what quote-unquote powerful means in Gates' remarks. In search of profits, businesses, Gates' phrase for this is people providing services for better teaching, end quote, will continuously compete to find new ways to meet market demand. If left free from government regulation, these market efficiencies will reduce the cost of labor of public education while it improves the effective services to all individuals who choose to use it as the means to acquire credentials in order to raise personal income potential. Through this ideological lens, then, the primary problem facing American schools is not how to equalize the two public school systems that serve the better off and the poor, but rather how to create and maintain and nurture market forces in the American public schools, as well as all other aspects of our lives. Common Core standards and alignment are the hypothesis and the argument for policies to address that problem. In this way, the 30 years of school reform, from a nation at risk to the race to the top, can be understood simply as the ideological practices to make the creation of this market and these positions appear normal to the general public and the participants. And it seems to have been successful. Think about the last time you heard someone or some group with power speak against the neoliberal mantra that American schools are in dire need of reform if we are to compete in the global innovation economy. Although this market will bring jobs and innovation, the market is not a good set of organizing principles for public education. That is, if you seek policy and action to rectify the existing inequalities. Demand in the market around Common Core will create jobs and profits in the design and marketing of new teaching tools. And that includes the tests, of course. At a different level, a lower level of income, it will spawn employment in their manufacture, their delivery, and maintenance as well. Each state will need workers to facilitate and to monitor teachers and students' access to and use of these new technologies, with national companies vying to pair both groups for measured success. And if the specific demand appears lucrative enough, then niche markets will emerge to provide new tools to address the income and other types of achievement gaps. In these ways, the Common Core can have a direct but not a dramatic effect on the American economy, although more school funding will flow out of and bypass local economies. Markets are good at distributing resources efficiently to the producers of commodities for which there is the most demand. Producers seek profits and competitive advantage to secure those profits, and consumers seek use and status through their purchase. Self-regulating exchange is a dispassionate individual cash transaction without regard for history, tradition, externalities, or need. The competition among producers pushes continuous innovation for advantage and cost controls to ensure profits within the limits of what consumers are willing but not necessarily able to pay. Within markets, however, there is little security or stability for the producer or the consumer or the workers or the communities in between them. Innovation can render commodities, skills, and companies moot with severe short-term consequences for all involved. Fluctuation in price, income and wealth, credit determine who can and who cannot consume regardless of human need. Although markets produce innovation and jobs for someone, somewhere, even Adam Smith in The Wealth of Nations, the 1776 Bible of Capitalism, acknowledged that markets cannot and do not keep people in mind, and therefore they must be tempered with moral regulation of fairness and justice. That temperance is somewhat evident in President Obama's and Bill Gates' rhetorical representation and frames for Common Core standards, but only the powerful market remains in the light of evidence. Common Core standards ensure only that public schools will have the continuous innovation and a redistribution of public resources to private businesses competing for market advantages with their focus on profits. And Whitehurst and Loveless demonstrated there is little reason to believe that the innovation and profits will translate into more fair and just distribution of the benefits of schooling. So this is how we got to where we are right now in the United States, the ideology of neoliberalism, with its faith in markets to solve all social problems. It makes Common Core standards a politically acceptable and economically feasible policy to address the problems of how to improve the performance of schools. Public schools could be and should be the American institution that promotes fairness and justice as values, a place where we learn to construct ourselves as citizens in an active democracy, with a curriculum that helps us know what markets can do and what they cannot do. Part of this pedagogy and curriculum would be to understand the facts as demonstrated by this reading wide awake at the Common Core standards. Markets are neither natural nor free. Rather, we have discovered through reading wide awake Markets are human artifacts that people brought and are bringing into existence, that people work to maintain, and therefore, because they are human artifacts, people can change markets if we so desire. And as even Adam Smith imagined it, governments can and should temper markets through regulation in order to keep people in mind always. I want to believe that President Obama and Bill Gates and other advocates for Common Core standards believe this to be true as well. However, their neoliberal ideology and the actions that they've taken give me pause. We cannot improve schools by forcing dispassionate market principles into them. The evidence suggests that market-based programs have been problematic in the Common Core standards, but also in the turnaround improvement grants, or teacher financial incentives, or charter schools, or even Teach for America. When researchers peel back these representations and interrogate these frames, all that's left is the neoliberal ideology of markets that Gates praised in his remarks to the state legislature. Reading Wide Awake to demonstrate that the rationale for Common Core standards lacks evidence opens up spaces for teachers and others to insert themselves into the discussion of why standards, what standards, even whether standards, as well as how to do standards. And we can use the contradiction between the Common Core standard for reading and its statement about pedagogy from its Myths and Facts website to catapult ourselves into these discussions. After all, as we read earlier, the Common Core Reading Anchor Standard 8 invites us to delineate and evaluate the argument and specific claims in a text, including the validity of the reasoning as well as the relevance and sufficiency of the evidence. That's what we did with the Common Core tonight. If Jeff and Dave are correct and Tim is wrong, then the standards invites teachers to engage in reading wide awake without any limits. But Common Core Standards official statements about pedagogy seems to limit teachers' domain to the four corners of their classroom. That's the second quote on the slide. The best understanding of what works in classrooms comes from teachers who are in them. That's why these standards will establish what students need to learn, but they will not dictate how teachers should teach. Instead, schools and teachers will decide how best to help students reach those standards. The latter statement might appear to be a compliment and a granting of agency, but waking up to the public pedagogy of the Common Core movement, we can understand such statements as ideological tools. Anchor 8 grants others that they can read all text, but the statement in the Myths and Facts limits teachers to reading only their classrooms in the Common Core process. Classrooms are wonderful places, but if we seek to equalize the benefits of schooling between both American school systems, if we seek to engage academic and public pedagogies to foster fairness, justice, and democracy, and if we seek to keep people foremost in our minds at all times, then we must read and act beyond the four corners of our classrooms, because as Robert Reich explains, nothing good happens in Washington, or for that matter in state capitals, unless good people outside Washington and those state capitals make it happen, unless they push very hard, unless they're organized, mobilized, and energized to force the political system to respond. Thank you very much for listening. I don't know what happens now.
Thank you, Ted. Next one.
Dr. Shannon, thank you so much for your insightful and engaging presentation. Let's give him a virtual round of applause.